including, he's got a book in the works. It's tentatively entitled Tales of the Bizarre from Silla, Korea. And it sounds like it will be a very interesting one. His talk today is titled Dhāranī and Mantra in Contemporary Korean Buddhism, a textual ethnography of spell materials for popular consumption. So I hope you all can join me in welcoming virtually or otherwise Professor McBride.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to thank Dr. Jacob Hickman and Dr. Thompson and the Department of Anthropology for inviting me to give this presentation. I think next month I'm giving a similar kind of talk at the University of Pennsylvania. Different topic, but this is good practice to see how these Zoom lectures go. It's sort of fun to sit in your own house, sort of. Not as much as being with you would be, though. So I picked this talk, and I picked this particular lecture, in part, your being, anthropology, because the word ethnography is in my title. And I think the materials that we'll be looking at are interesting. But to a certain extent, I'm a textual scholar, a pre-modernist, okay? And I'll try and set the stage a little bit. The materials that we're looking at, Dhāranī and mantra, these are very popular. Spells and incantations, certainly ever since the Harry Potter movies have come out, have become very popular. And spells and incantations have long been popular in East Asia. I'm just going to try and set the stage a little bit for you before, so that you can understand a bit. The meaning and function of Dhāranī and mantras in Buddhist traditions is one of the most stimulating discussions in which scholars are currently engaged. This essay is an investigation of the uses of Dhāranīs and mantras in contemporary Korean Buddhism in South Korea by examining literature and materials intended for lay Buddhists. So these are not Buddhist monks, these are just ordinary church-going Buddhists. Now, the phrase realization of one's desires, soan sangchi, in this expression in Korean Buddhism functions a lot like the expression genzei ryaku in Japanese. So, Buddhists themselves are interested in having their wants and desires and things happen beneficially right now. How do they do that? How do they make that happen? Now, practices promising the realization of one's desires, of which activities invoking and utilizing spells and incantations are targeted specifically toward lay Buddhists. Now, following literary precedent set in medieval East Asian, medieval Chinese Buddhism, the terms Dhāranī, now Dhāranī is a Sanskrit word that means to hold on to. It means to preserve or hold on to, okay? And mantras have been around for a long time. Mantras are sort of words of power, spells, incantations. In East Asia and East Asian Buddhism, these terms are used interchangeably. Scholars of Buddhism, they like to try to differentiate them, but the way they're used textually in the East Asian tradition shows that they are, in many respects, interchangeable. In a sense, Dhāranī was a Buddhist term coined to function kind of like a mantra, and then over time, as Buddhism adopted and absorbed more elements from mainstream Indian religion, it co-opted and adopted the word mantra too. And so in early medieval texts, you can talk about a Dhāranī mantra, for instance. And so, these terms are kind of interchangeable. People know mantra, businesses have a mantra, and people throw around the word mantra in the West, but functionally, a mantra is a word of power to invoke a deity, invoke a being of power, and to get it to do something you want it to do. Well, anyways, these are used interchangeably in the materials that I look at. Now, popular interest in Dhāranīs has been increasing steadily since the turn of the 21st century, in conjunction with the return to popularity of apotropaic charms and talismans, and sort of drawing on long-standing traditions. Contemporary promoters of the ritual application of Dhāranīs assert that aspirants, in a sense, people who aspire to have spiritual development, they will not forget the Buddha's teachings and will attain enlightenment quickly through the use, the memorization of Dhāranī. They will overcome all manner of disasters and calamities and will get rid of all kinds of karmic obstacles if they memorize them. So any kinds of, there are huge and very broad promises that are made for people that learn these kinds of spells. Now, the translation of mantra into Chinese, into East Asian languages, is Jinan, true words. These are real words, words of power. Now, essentially, in this presentation, I want to briefly go over 5 kinds of uses of Dhāranī. First is in personal devotionals. So when we talk about personal scripture study and the sort of things that people do daily, whether it's singing hymns or reading scriptures, these are sort of in prayer, these are personal devotionals. Then people also copy sutra materials for merit. They copy scriptures, but they may also copy spells. And then people use and have talismans. These are, when I was growing up in Los Angeles in the 70s and early 80s, sometimes people would carry a lucky rabbit's foot or a 4-leaf clover, okay? Talismans, these are, those sorts of things are talismanic, okay? Lucky Charms, right? Not the cereal, the original Lucky Charms. But talismans, and we'll see some of these are examples of talismans on the bottom. These are credit card shaped, business card shaped that people can carry with them. And then the use of Dhāranī in exorcisms and death rituals. Because these are powerful, they can make things happen. And then finally, materials enshrined. When you empower a Buddhist image and make a Buddhist image, one that can be venerated or worshiped at a Buddhist temple, one of the ways that this is done is by stuffing sutras and spells and other kinds of things inside the image, and then a ritual is performed, okay? And so now lay people are often involved with these kinds of materials and doing these kinds of things. All right. Now, the idea for this essay, and this essay that this talk is based upon, was finally published in the International Journal, the Journal of the International Association of Buddhist Studies. It finally came out this year. But the idea for this essay gradually emerged over the course of about a decade. Okay, I've had the opportunity to visit South Korea regularly and almost yearly since the year 2005, and lived there in Korea for a year from 2007 to 2008 when I was a Fulbright scholar in Korean history at Dongguk University in Seoul. Now, before my Fulbright started, I spent the summer teaching summer school at Korea University in Seoul. And going out for a walk, I met the owner of a local Buddhist supply store right near Korea University, a man named Kang Shin-jung, whose pen name is Kosan. And although I did not realize it at the time, I had just met one of the leading so-called masters of talismans, a Pujak Tosa in contemporary Korea. an individual who specializes in producing both Buddhist and non-Buddhist talismans by hand. And now, over the course of more than the last decade, I have visited lots of Buddhist supply stores near Choge-sa, which is the main Buddhist temple in Seoul, Pongwon-sa in the Gangnam, in the Samsung ward in Seoul, and in Gyeongju, many of the places that I usually visit when I go to Korea. And people who work at the stores, as well as the materials contained in the stores, have been my primary informants, sort of supplementing my own observations. Now, I do not pretend to follow the accepted procedures of anthropologists or ethnographers. Rather, this is an exploratory attempt at a textual ethnography of a widespread contemporary Korean Buddhist practice. Okay, I'm drawing inspiration from a paper written many decades ago by the late scholar Michel Strickmann, who discussed the panoply of Buddhist spells and ritual procedures available in one particular Buddhist text called the Consecration Sutra. Now, a textual ethnography centered on materials produced and published for a mass market in a society oriented towards capitalism presents its own strengths and weaknesses. So really what I've done is I've gone out, collected materials that are out there, cheap materials that ordinary people can afford, things that cost $1, $1.50, $2, the sorts of things that are intended for lay people. The fact that a publication, there are certain strengths and weaknesses. For instance, the fact that a publication has been reprinted multiple times strongly suggests that the material contained inside has resonated with practitioners, right? People have been using it, they bought the material, and they keep reprinting it. Furthermore, the fact that inexpensive resources have stayed in print for many years, although the form of the presentation may have changed, slightly suggests deep and abiding interest in such materials. However, just because somebody purchases a book outlining various kinds of personal devotionals does not necessarily mean that he or she actually follows what the publication says, okay? Nevertheless, when the wealth of available materials encouraging Dhāranī practice is accumulated, the relevance and significance of the practice as a mainstream approach to the realization of lay people's desires is clearly manifest. So, that's sort of what I've been doing. I've been looking at materials that are accessible and are for lay people that cover a whole host of things. So, we have do-it-yourself ritual kits, right? Usually, often people may go to either a shaman, a spirit medium. I know anthropologists debate, British anthropologists they call them spirit mediums, whereas American anthropologists tend to call them shamans, right? But they can also go to Buddhist monks, but we have these sorts of do-it-yourself rituals that you don't even need to go to somebody for sort of getting rid of illness, misfortunes, and so forth. All right. So of course, in this short time, I can't talk about everything, but I'm just going to try to show you a few and talk about a few sorts of things. Now, certain books. So I'm going to talk about this one book, Devotional Methods for the Realization of One's Desires, new edition. This is the new edition right here, okay? Dhāranīs are found commonly in the personal devotionals described in an inexpensive, so this is 2,500 Korean won, about $2.25 US dollars, and a much reprinted guide called Devotional Methods for the Realization of One's Desires, So One Sungchi Kidobo. On the inside in the inside title page, the title is given as Devotional Methods for the Realization of One's Desires that you can do even by yourself. Okay. Now, first published in 1998, I attained a copy of the 15th printing published in 2012. The introductory matter outlines such things as the appropriate preparation and posture for devotees, the traditional order for offering Buddhist-style services, narratives of the miraculous resonance, this sort of miraculous appearances and sort of miracles associated with the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara. This is the Bodhisattva of compassion. A list of 12 kinds of merit, okay, glossed as resonance. So the kinds of merit or resonance one obtains if one offers devotions, and the method of making devotions by oneself. So this book is really, you know, how you can have spiritual experiences by yourself, okay? And so the book outlines a number of a sort of a 6-step routine and encourages people to follow it. And this includes offering worship, sutra recitation, chanting sutras, okay, repentance, and then offering sort of deep, assiduous devotions to this bodhisattva, kind of like a Buddhist saint, making vows, and then it outlines how one can take merit that one has got from all these previous behaviors of repentance and offering worship and so forth. They can transfer that to another person, to a deceased person, okay? And throughout this book, there are spells and Dhāranī. I mean, they are pervasive throughout this book. And so it includes, and it sort of lays out the procedure and then the short spells that they are to chant. And, you know, the short first section on offering worship, which is comprised of offering worship to the 3 jewels. That's the Buddha, his teaching, and the community of monks, has a short gatha. It's a sort of a short poem, a spiritual poem, a religious poem, and it closes with the aspirant chanting the invocation Om Paramik, 3 times. And then it goes on and lists a number of mantras. In many ritual practices, people empower themselves and empower what they're doing by chanting mantras. These mantras are supposed to sort of invoke and bring certain Buddhas and Bodhisattvas to come there. The mantra that purifies verbal karma. So you chant a mantra that makes what you say purified so that you'll get sort of the most bang for your ritual activity, okay? There's a mantra for comforting all the deities, the Buddhas and the saints of the 5 directions. There's a mantra for opening the storehouse of the Buddha Dharma, and so forth. And now, essentially what this book does is it sort of gives a step-by-step procedure on what you can do to utilize the 108 spells that are in what I call the Korean 1,000 Hand Sutra. I'm not the only one, but this 1,000 Hand Sutra is one of the most important ritual texts in Korean Buddhism. And over the course of the 20th century, it has evolved quite a bit, and there are lots of different versions, okay? And the center point of this 1,000 Hand Sutra, the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara has 1,000 hands. This is the Bodhisattva that helps other people and is the Bodhisattva of compassion. And so, you know, this is a sutra that can not only help you, but other people. The center point of this is a somewhat longer Dhāranī called the Great Dhāranī of Spiritually Sublime Phrases, okay? Now, another name for this particular spell is the Great Compassion Spell. And this spell has been around for a long time, but for some reason within this particular text, it's known as, the name for it is this Great Dhāranī of Spiritually Sublime Phrases, okay? And now one of the reasons why 108 is important, people repent and do things 108 times. in Buddhism, there are 108 defilements, 108 things that sort of keep people deluded and unhappy. Buddhists simplify this big list of 108 by talking about greed, hatred, and delusion, okay? And so through, in a sense, this book is something that enables somebody to sort of utilize the power of this sutra with spells and other kinds of things to get rid of the bad karma that keeps them having bad luck and things to happen, okay? So that's one kind of text. Now, there are many other kinds of texts that people can use. Sometimes sutras themselves, Dhāranī sutras, are formatted by a Buddhist monk and put in, there's different kinds of phrases and information and explanations that help people understand and utilize something. There are these kind of accordion cards. This one is a kind of a little ritual that people can do for basically helping. Often mothers will purchase this sort of thing and follow it so that they can pray to help their children do well on the college entrance examination, okay? This particular book is essentially, my translation is, sort of everyday mantras, must memorize Dhāranīs, okay? Things that you should know, right? These are things that are useful, that are beneficial. Okay. Anyway, so personal devotionals to sort of bring together a lot of, there's all kinds of material available to do this. Another activity, and people can do this alone and by themselves, is copying sutras. Now, copying sutras, sagyang, this term is both to copy something, to copy a scripture and get merit from doing that, good karma, but it is also the term for like an illustrated manuscript, okay? But we're not worrying about that other meaning right now. So sutra material copied for merit. People will copy scriptures. This person is copying this, and by copying it in their own hand, they get merit for making a copy. They get good karma. Now, there's different kinds of things that happen. In these Buddhist supply stores, they often have these collections where there's like 100 sheets of paper, and here we have the great Dhāranī and spiritually sublime phrases, and then we have the spell itself, Namora, Tanadara, and it goes on. It's all written in the Korean script. These kinds of materials are intended for people getting together, so lay people would get together and copy the sutra or copy the spell together as a group, okay? So they do it together as a group. And there are lots of different versions of these same ones. This is an example of that great Dhāranī of spiritually sublime phrases. But then there's also there's also books that people purchase to copy it by themselves. This is that same great Dhāranī of spiritually sublime phrases, and these are just 3 other different editions by different publishers. And it's the same sutra. These are all meant for different, these are all meant for sort of personal use. And there's a lot of similarity, but there's also some difference. It really depends on whatever monk or nun has added information in there. But typically it's the copying of the scripture that is seen to be what brings merit. Then when it comes to talismans, okay, talismans are very intriguing. Now, when I met that famous master of talismans, Kosan, he told me that spells written on white paper were Buddhist talismans, and talismans written on yellow paper were not, okay? He said he used the word Confucian, But I think what he means here is something that's more like sort of mainstream East Asian Taoist, okay? Now, if you go into a Buddhist supply store, these talismans are more expensive because these are hand-drawn. And these typically cost between $5 and $10 a piece. So one talisman written by a talisman specialist, these are more expensive than many of these mass-produced books that people purchase. People can carry them on their person. They place them underneath their bed. They put it in a strategic place in their car, okay? So these kinds of talismans are one. And then we also have kind of more mass-produced or published talismans. Okay, here we have, and these are essentially a credit card size that people carry around in their wallets. Okay. Now, one of the most common ones that we have is one of the most common mantras or Dhāranīs that appears. Maybe some of you have heard Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum. You know, Padme from the Star Wars movie, she's named, Padme is the Sanskrit word for a lotus. And anyway, but this is, you know, these have some of these spells. Sometimes they have, so here we have the Siddham script, which is a script that's often used for spells in East Asia, but yet we also have a Korean transliteration. Okay, and so we have the most popular ones are the Bodhisattva of Compassion, Avalokiteshvara. Although this Bodhisattva started out as a male, the compassion is viewed as very female in East Asia, and over time, Avalokiteshvara has become considered as sort of a female bodhisattva. And then Bodhidharma, who's supposedly the founder of Zen Buddhism. These are two of the more popular. There's lots of different versions with these figures on them. Okay. So people carry these around. And so with these kinds of spells, they come in lots of different versions. This mantra for subjugating demons. Now in the pre-modern world, people viewed sickness as, for the most part, different kinds of sickness being caused by different kinds of demons. So if you have a whooping cough or you have epilepsy, then it's a demon that causes this kind of sickness. And so a longstanding tradition would be for individuals that, you know, that have certain kinds of problems to carry a talisman on them, or perhaps to burn it and consume the ashes by drinking it. Okay, they have this. So this is the mantra for subjugating demons. Here we have it in Indian script and then in the Korean vernacular script. Sometimes you just have an Indian script, and sometimes you may just have a Korean script, but we can see different versions of these in these pictures that I've shown here. And so, and many of these ones that are hand-drawn, these are seen to be believed to be more powerful if they're drawn by somebody who's important. So some of them we just have the words. Other times this is sort of a stylized Chinese character. These are the sorts of things that are in other Chinese religious traditions, such as Taoism. You have these special, you have these characters that have characters inside of them. Like this right here is the character for heaven, and this is the character for commands. Heaven commands, and you have the word for demons down here, and you have, symbols that remind people of asterism, sort of star things. But then we also have a lotus flower shape here with squiggly lines, and so this is a talisman for the realization of one's desires. So having this talisman and using it appropriately helps you get what you want, okay? These are, this is sort of one of the big things, right? Getting what you want, having things happen the way you want them to. This particular talisman is for the eradication of sundry demons. So we have a demon picture right here, and we have the sort of stylized, expansive Chinese characters. What we really have, and of course this has happened a long time ago, is Buddhist scriptures describe and encourage people to write the words of the spell out. Whereas in what we can think of as Taoist traditions in China, they draw these stylized characters. And what we have is a fusion of Indian and Chinese practices. And of course, these are, for me, I can't really tell. I've seen the same spell on both white and red. And, that's interesting that the specialist says the white ones are Buddhist and the yellow ones are non-Buddhist, but I really can't tell the difference. And you can get both of them at any stores. So this is an interesting one as well. This is the talisman for success in an examination, finding employment, and obtaining a promotion, right? You can see how spells are focused on the realistic concerns of people, okay? Now, many people and many Buddhist scholars will argue that Dhāranī and mantra is esoteric Buddhism, okay? Esoteric, it's sort of like secret. Scholars of Latter-day Saint, of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints who aren't Latter-day Saints talk about anything to do with a temple as the esoteric stuff, okay? That you have to be initiated and consecrated for. Well, by looking at these materials, to me, this is practical Buddhist thaumaturgy. This is practical Buddhist miracle working, right? You have these rituals and they take care of ordinary concerns, right? For a student, passing the college entrance exam, hapgyak, is the most important thing they can do, right? Finding employment is the next important thing you can do after you graduate from college, and then getting a promotion. I mean, this is just, these are the main things that people worry about. It's the stuff that your professors worry about, right? You worry about passing the tests and we worry about getting a promotion, right? So, these get at the concerns of people. Then another sort of thing that we have are the function of them in exorcisms and death rituals, okay? Now, I don't really have time to go into this, but the materials, like that book I described previously, has a section that describes rituals that ordinary people can do and chant spells and so forth to help their deceased loved ones. So things that they can do to sort of help their deceased loved ones on the way. Here we have, the outer envelope, and these are fairly cheap. I mean, if I remember correctly, this was like $1.50. This is a kit for the Dhāranī for meeting with good fortune, which helps you to get rid of illness and sickness. But the most interesting things to me are these. We have a package for we have a man's, so this is the Dhāranī clothes for a man and the Dhāranī clothes for a woman, okay? And when people die, they don't actually dress the body in the robes, but all the parts. So like a upper part and pants and socks, all these things are included. And typically what people do is there's a part for them to write the name of the deceased, to write the name of the person who donated it to them. And by having a person buried or cremated with the package with them, that empowers and protects the body and helps them be reborn in a good place. So if they have bad karma, being buried with the mantra clothes helps get rid of the bad karma and take them to a good place, okay? And these are things that lay people do. And so I find them very fascinating. And then finally, we have materials enshrined in the chest cavity. In many ways, these are somewhat similar. These are somewhat similar to what we saw earlier when people copy the scriptures. But what happens is when new Buddhist images are being made, this is an opportunity for lay people to get good karma, good merit, by purchasing materials. Now, this is a whole stack of a particular spell, the Great Dhāranī and Immaculately Pure Light, and whole sections of hundreds of pages of the same spell are used to stuff inside of a Buddhist image. And so this is something that lay people, they can purchase it and then donate it for the images that are being made. Okay, so a lot of what they're doing is trying to get good karma. And one of the reasons why I talk about this last is because it's not something that they actively do, but it's more passive. Here we can see another version where we have the spell in the Siddham script. Sometimes they have it, this is a very Indian style of doing it, to have the whole spell written around in the Siddham script. And then the last little thing I want to talk about. Okay, so we have this, now certain famous poems, this diagram of the quintessence of the Dharma nature, the Bapsangye is a spell, or it's actually it's a poem that was written in a seal shape by the monk Huizang way back in the late 7th century. Okay, and the real full name is the seal diagram symbolizing the Dharma realm of the one vehicle of the Abatamsaka, the Huam Ilsang Bapgedo. Now, the methods that are described, so you have a copy of the spell inside there, and you put it in one's automobile or on the chest of the deceased before interring them. Okay, if you put it in your car, they claim that you will be free from accidents and car breakdowns, and the deceased will go to the Pure Land, which is sort of the Pure Land in the West, okay? And then the living people who do this will amass great loads of merit, okay? So we have these simple do-it-yourself kits that get people involved, and we have objects that have a sort of a doctrinal use that are then transformed into talismans, right? And this is a very interesting thing. Now, this particular seal diagram is very intriguing because it's incredible. It's very symbolic, but we have it turned into a very practical purpose. Anyways, let me close, and I've probably gone on a little longer than I should, but let me close with some statements from my conclusion. Dhāranīs and mantras are an integral part of the practical life of Korean Buddhists in the 21st century. Far from being incidental to lay practice, the recitation of mantras and Dhāranīs is emerging as a central component to the successful realization of one's desires. Drawing on long-standing traditions, contemporary promoters of the ritual application of Dhāranīs assert that aspirants will not forget the Buddhist teachings and will obtain enlightenment quickly, overcome all manner of disasters and calamities, and get rid of all manner of karmic obstacles if they memorize them. Okay, now lay people, right, use these 5 ways, utilize Dhāranīs in 5 ways: in personal devotionals, as sutra material copied for merit, as talismans, and in household and business rituals supplicating for this worldly benefits, for exorcisms and death rituals, and as materials enshrined in the chest cavities of Buddhist images and in pagodas. Although lay people must rely on monastic experts in the appropriate rituals for the eye-opening and enshrining objects in the chest cavities of Buddhist images, their hopes and wishes are manifest to some extent in the Dhāranīs and mantras they choose to be placed in the images they commission. The most popular Dhāranī from the standpoint of accessibility to cheap reproductions as well as broad application is the Great Dhāranī of spiritually sublime phrases, which is more generally known in East Asia as the Great Compassion Spell. Widely reproduced as part of the Korean Thousand Hand Sutra, the most commonly used liturgical sutra in contemporary Korean Buddhism, this variant of the Nilakantha Dhāranī circulates in a wide variety of forms and is used in most forms of devotional practice and seeking this worldly benefits. Another recent development, right, is this quintessence of the Dharma nature, right, the use of this as a talisman. What's the significance of this widespread use of Dhāranīs? All of these materials can be used effectively and efficaciously, or at least so the directions say, without recourse to the mediation of monks and nuns. But one would be hard-pressed to find religious activities more ritualistic than the recitation of Dhāranīs. The mantras and Dhāranīs are powerful in and of themselves and follow the procedures. Okay, in other words, if one prepares and follows the directions and the procedures, they promise the realization of one's desires, whatever they might be. Although some instructions encourage practitioners to be mindful and contemplative, particularly Uihang's everyday mantras, to argue that internal spiritual development is more important than the acquisition of this worldly benefits is difficult. The mass-produced materials articulate many distinct desired outcomes of practice. Does this then replace the importance or necessity of mediating monks and nuns? If a superfluous position or for monastics is understood as the essential component of modern religion, this position is ambivalent in contemporary lay-oriented Korean Buddhism because the primary producers of this overwhelming amount of cheap, accessible, mass-produced material are monastics themselves. This being the case, this material cannot be seen as replacing the role of a monastic teacher. Rather, the monk author serves as an unseen spiritual mentor who guides the lay aspirant through an overwhelming amount of potential ritual behavior, such as the hundreds of known mantras, to the most beneficial practice to accomplish his or her desires. Perhaps the best Western term to use as a heuristic device to investigate and understand Dhāranīs and mantras is the Latin expression ex opere operato. I know I'm not saying the Latin right, but from the work worked. In Roman Catholicism, the expression usually refers to sacraments, rites, ceremonies, rituals, services, deriving their power from Christ's work, rather than the role or ministration of humans. A popular misunderstanding of the concept is that rituals or liturgies work automatically or independently of the faith of the recipient. For East Asian Buddhism, we might read aspirant or practitioner. The officially sanctioned position, however, is for a sacrament to work. The recipient, for a sacrament to work, the recipient needs faith. In modern usage, the expression frequently refers to the idea that the sacraments are efficacious in and of themselves rather than being contingent on the attitude or faith of either the minister or the recipient. From this perspective, the efficacy of a ritual is a result, not of the priest or minister, but of Christ himself. The usefulness and practicality of this concept in investigating Buddhist Dhāranīs and mantras should be obvious, although here I will do no more than paint a few broad strokes to say and save a more thorough analysis for later. Where do Dhāranīs and mantras derive their efficacy and apotropaic power from? Is it the faith and preparation of the practitioner, or the latent spiritual power of the Buddha or Bodhisattvas who taught the spell, or for whom the spell is named? The role of the transfer of merit from Buddhas and Bodhisattvas in the effectual use of Dhāranīs and mantras cannot be overstated, and its similarity to the power by which Roman Catholic sacraments are believed to work cannot be ignored. This being the case, however, following the procedures for using Dhāranīs and mantras are somewhat different than receiving Christian sacraments. Chanting Buddhist spells is active behavior, and the act of reciting Dhāranīs and mantras is said to purify the body and the mind of the practitioner, rid the person of unwholesome karma, and bestow personal power. Receiving Christian sacraments can be seen as passive behavior, with the priest or minister functioning as the conduit of Christ's power. In the contemporary Korean practice of Dhāranis and mantras, however, both active and passive elements are present, which may account in part for the broad popularity of these ritual practices, because they appeal to ordinary people with varying spiritual capacities and faith in the power of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, function to calm and focus the mind on a single purpose or for a specific result, and are supported by large collections of stories, anecdotes, and narratives attesting to their efficacy. I'll try and stop there. I could ramble on for a while, but thank you, and I'm looking forward to your questions.